Live on WFLA Now. Feel good and live your best life with Bloom Health Club. Here's Gail Guayardo.
You know, they say parenting does not come with a handbook, but one woman has created a space for moms and dads to have some real talk when it comes to raising the kiddos. Joining me now is the parenting guru, Leonie Akhidenor. Leonie, welcome to the Bloom Health Club.
Thank you for having me.
So, Leonie, talk to me a little bit about what made you decide to launch your podcast.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Often our passions and our businesses are bred from times of struggle or things that we want to learn in our lives. And for me, I just had my second child. He was 6 weeks old. I was in the depths of postnatal depression for the second time. My eldest was 18 months and it was COVID. It was lockdown. In Australia, in Melbourne, there were pretty severe lockdown restrictions. We couldn't leave our neighbourhood. We couldn't see anyone outside of our primary family. It was very regulated. And that just compounded my anxiety and stress, on top of postnatal. And I wanted to connect with people. I wanted to hear other parents' stories of struggle, of challenge, what was happening behind closed doors. And so essentially I started this podcast, which was just really to heal me, but now has evolved into something much bigger.
And it's important for you to have parents together, whatever that dynamic looks like. You feel like both parties should be included in the conversation.
Absolutely, because I think there are so many beautiful resources out there, podcasts, etc., for mums. I'd say in the Australian market, less so for dads, but they do exist. But often people aren't bringing both people in the relationship to the conversation, so that when one person says, I felt this way, what does the other person think? And therefore, what's the best sort of outcome or resolution or, a conclusion that we can make from their time of struggle? It just felt like a more holistic approach.
So what kind of conversations get sparked when you bring both parties to the table in the podcast, talking about some really interesting subjects that I think all of us as parents can relate to?
One thing that is so common is this feeling of the inequity in the household duties between partners. So often we always think that we are doing a lot, right? All of a sudden we went from being footloose and fancy free to having children and this endless to-do list. And as an individual, as a parent, we think, wow, we're doing it all. And often we can look at our partners and think, what are they doing? Like, I'm doing more than you, surely. And then what can happen over time is that resentment can build because you don't feel as though the other person is pulling their weight. And I hear it from both parents. And so it's such a common thing. And essentially it will breed certain behaviors in the household, like passive aggressiveness or, tit for tat, we call it, where one person is point scoring, I think they may call it here.
Right.
But this sort of competitive tension that can exist, and it is so common.
And then the other thing that's really common after the kids arrive is that, the sex life for moms and dads or parents or partners, whatever, it goes to hell in a handbasket.
Absolutely, because we are so touched out by the baby. The baby is on you constantly. The baby needs you. You haven't had sleep. You can barely have a shower. You are feeling as the least sexy version of yourself that ever existed. And therefore, your priorities sort of shift where baby sits on top as the highest priority. And then all of a sudden, relationship and intimacy and things like that sits, 20 rungs down, and then your own self-care and well-being under that. So absolutely, we tend to see this behavior that where two parents may become more like roommates versus an actual couple.
Okay, I want to bring in Brody Waddell, our lead producer for Bloom Tampa Bay and digital reporter. This also gives me, Leonie, an opportunity to probe into Brody's personal life. Now, I know you're still young and, you're in a serious relationship, but, will kids be on your horizon one of these days, or are you going to be a dink?
I think so. It's funny, actually, my stepsister just asked me this question the other day. She's like, are you ever going to settle down and have kids? And I go, I don't know. It's interesting because the lifestyle I kind of lead doesn't really lend itself to being a parent like right now. But I like the idea of it, but it just seems like not only is it like such a shift in your day to day, but just like, to reference like a joking meme, like this economy, You know, the idea of like having kids and then balancing everything else out, it's like I think for a lot of people, certainly in my generation and younger, it almost seems like that's just some fantasy. And it doesn't matter how bad you want to have kids. It's not really something that you can bring to fruition.
Yeah, yeah. Did you worry about its impact on your relationship?
I mean, it depends. Do you mean in terms of one person wanting children and another person not,
Or just,
oh wow, wow,
ruining your
right? Yes, also that. Yes, you know, everyone tells me the sex goes to hell in a handbasket, and you know, you got to focus on the baby. So, yeah, I mean, there's obviously like a lot of. It just seems like maybe out of selfishness that I almost don't want to have that challenge. But also, like I do want to have kids at some point. It's just like not right now. But I've been saying that I feel like for the last 10 years.
Well, you're still young, so
Yeah.
you have some time, some breathing room here. But when you get both parents on, with the microphone there, what are some common denominators that, when it comes to subject lines, that tend to bubble to the top?
So, a lot of things, essentially people don't feel as though you can't really prepare for this. And then all of a sudden all these sort of, it's a lived experience. And we're sort of saying earlier, like you're never ready for it. And so essentially, definitely key themes is, I didn't think that my partner and I would just become co-pilots navigating this ship and, just essentially trying to survive. I didn't realize the impact sleep deprivation has on our well-being. Now, that was a new one for me because, I mean, don't get me wrong, in my 20s, I had a good time, but I had nights where I wasn't sleeping all that much because I was partying, I was out, I was doing whatever. And I'm like, I'm pretty resilient, and then you're sleep deprived for weeks on end with a child and you're like, wow, this is a completely different story. I don't know, like, can you relate to that feeling?
Yes. I could definitely. I mean, at the time, I was waking up at 1:30 in the morning to go to work, so I knew sleep deprivation on a whole new level. But it is amazing how it can add to it. I mean, because you don't get to just close your eyes and fall asleep and take a power nap when you want to. It has to be on the baby's schedule.
You're always a little bit on edge. If I close my eyes, how long do I have to sleep, So just so many things like that you can't prepare for. But it's amazing that when you're in it, you get through it. But I guess what I love about a lot of the content and the conversations I'm bringing to the table is if we are more aware about certain behaviors or certain challenges that can exist, then if they do crop up in our families, our households, our relationships, we can go, oh, that's that tit for tat thing. We're doing that, the point scoring thing. We're doing that now. So maybe I'm just really tapped out. Maybe I need to start prioritizing myself because I'm falling into this behavior that's not productive for the household. So, but the point is, if you don't talk about it, you just keep chugging along, as they say in Australia, just sort of chug along. And, years can go by and you're sort of just trying to keep your head above water. So I don't know. I think there's so much power in sharing those stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah, without a doubt. Now, do you share child rearing advice and stories of every age or primarily for when they're just wee ones?
Primarily, I'd say under the age of, I'm going to call it 10,
Okay.
right? Under the age of 10 years old. We haven't hit the teenage years yet. I'm so excited to do so
Yeah.
because I think that will be a whole new kettle of fish, but certainly the younger years. And I say that because I guess having younger children, my children are 5 and 4, I was initially looking for stories, from people within my age group. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how that evolves over time.
If you ever need a guest for the teenage parents, I got you.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah.
done. Well,
Because I have noticed, in parenting alongside my husband, who's an amazing co-parent. I mean, he's so hands-on. So I've never felt that tit for tat or that one person was doing more than the other because he's always been so hands-on. But I would say as kids get older and older, you do start to have a different lens of maybe disciplining or like what battles are worth fighting, that kind of thing. We tend to, because we have 4 daughters and, we see things, he's way more strict than I am. So we have to go a lot behind closed doors to get on the same footing so that we're not, not looking like a weak link in front of the children. And so it's definitely interesting to have both perspectives, because then you can hear from both sides. Because I'm sure a lot of parents deal with that, whether they're wee ones or all the way up through the teen years.
Absolutely. And the other one that comes to mind, particularly, I guess, teen years, I more recently, a few days ago, I was in New York. Actually, I just flew from New York this morning, but a few days ago in New York, I hit the streets with a microphone and a camera person, and I said, I'm going to speak to parents and I want to know their biggest challenges. You know, let's see, what can they bring me? And I loved it because so many people were so eager to come up because I had the microphone. They were like, what are you doing? Oh, I'll tell you. One of the most common themes, which I thought was really interesting, was so many parents saying, one of my biggest challenges is letting go and enabling my child to make their mistakes, and for me to step back and kind of just be an observer and be ready for them when they come to me, you know, to be consoled or to get some advice and things like that. We were talking to people who have children of all ages. So I thought that was really interesting. I mean, I'd love your perspective as well. It would be quite difficult if you're watching your child go down a path and you're like, oh, I don't know about that, but then I don't want to be too overbearing.
Right. It's true, because for me, I like, with all of my daughters, I'm like, listen, I'll help you bury the first body, but if bodies keep washing ashore, you know, that's a problem. So, I mean, I get that we all make mistakes in life, and if you keep the same pattern of mistakes, that's an issue for me. But then I also like to give them enough rope to hang themselves, because my whole thing is, I trust you until I don't. Like, you know, let's just see how far we can go with this, of how far you're going to walk to the edge and what kind of decisions that you're going to make. Where on the flip side, my husband likes to be more controlling of the decisions, the coming home, the this, the that, the waiting, the installing cameras, all the things that I think would make a child rebel more. So it's interesting, because it hasn't been until the teenage years that was ever even an issue.
Right. Well,
yeah.
I think we're so risk adverse, especially if you're a parent, and then you like want it to be as close to zero as possible. But that's like a foundational aspect of growing up and learning. You know what I mean? My parents were tremendously they didn't really that controlling at all. And I was a good kid. You know what I mean? I didn't have a lot of issues. They never told me you need to be home by a certain time. You can't see these people. Don't do drugs. Don't do alcohol. I mean, they did say that, but they weren't like, you know what I mean? And I didn't. And then until I went to college, then I had fun. You know what I'm saying? But I never had issues. I wasn't sneaking out or doing anything. And it was just it was like you said, if you just give them the space, it's almost like, well, there's no reason for me to do that unless you were going to do it anyway.
Oh, 100%. I can resonate with that. Even just from my family example, I'm the eldest, and then my next sister is 6 years younger than me. My parents were migrant parents in Australia, so that very kind of focus on academics. We're very lucky to be in this country. You know, don't step sideways, just focus, you know, and get success. And for me, similarly, my dad was very controlling, I would say, in the way that he thought he was doing the best he could in our circumstances, and really, but I would rebel, right? And I would always be the one that was on the extreme and try to get out, you know, you climb out the window to go to the party or whatever it looked like to make sure I could still do those things. Whereas it was interesting, my parents parented my sisters. My sisters are a year apart, 6 years after me, in a very different way. They gave them a lot more rope. And so often I'd say to my sisters, are you going to that party, or do you want me to buy you alcohol? And they would be like, maybe not tonight. Maybe I'll go to the next one. And I was like, do you know how much I had to fight to leave the house? Because again, you give them a bit of breathing room and they'll probably make more mature decisions. Probably, I say, because we don't know 100%. But.
Yeah, but that's how I find with my kids. They're not the ones at the party. They're not the ones out drinking late. And I'm the parent that's like, yeah, well, you know, I get home at a decent hour. And so it's interesting. I like the dueling parent perspective, because sometimes parents are very much on the same page, and then other times I'm sure they're coming at it from different angles, I would imagine, on your show.
Absolutely. Do you find, because it's really interesting speaking to parents where, and particularly as children get older, they get smarter around, you know, they know who to ask, which parent to ask, sort of things. Yeah. Do you find that problematic? And then how do you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, it's funny because my daughter, she knows I'm the weaker link for sure. So a lot of times they'll come to me, but when they come to both of us in the same room and they ask a question, it's almost simultaneously as my husband and I are answering, I say yes, as he's at the exact time saying no. And it's like, yes, no. And, because his answer to everything is no. And so, yeah. So, I mean, I have to get on the same page with him because I believe that it's not fair to the other parent to not try to get on the same page. And that can take us a minute. Like we'll depart for 15, 20 minutes in the back of the room, hash this out, and then come out with our united front. But it's, we're definitely two different people. And, I grew up with a father, much like you described yours, who was extremely strict. And my best friend, her name's Angela, she's the one that kept me out of a lot of trouble because we followed her lead and her parents were not strict. And she just didn't do things wrong because it didn't mean anything to her. There was no thrill to it.
The thrill is huge, isn't it?
Yeah. I think the thrill is everything.
Totally. Got to get that thrill out of it.
Yeah. What are you getting away with? So it's interesting. But you do talk a lot with parents about how to keep the spark alive in their relationship because that can go south pretty quickly after having kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the best place to start, if for those listening, you're sitting there going, well, that's us. And perhaps we are a little bit more in that roommate sort of, passing ships and just ticking things off the to-do list. Okay, so where do we start? I think first and foremost, we start with acknowledging where we're at because often the years will float by and you're just like, that's too hard. But as soon as you make a decision to change and decide I'm going to do something different today, then that's a great starting point. I'd say secondly, try to book that a date night in the diary. And often if we don't put it in there, it's never going to happen. I know certainly in my experience, it doesn't anyway. So, I mean, that could look different for so many couples. It could be, Uber Eats on the couch if you can't get away. Not everyone has the privilege of having, call it babysitters or perhaps older kids who can look after themselves. So, maybe it's a home date or maybe it's a date at a restaurant or a bowling date. You can sort of change it up. But the purpose is to reconnect without interruption from all of that distraction that we live and breathe on the daily. So, and I find that if you are starting to put those in regularly, and I say I find with speaking to so many people that they've said when they started to prioritize each other by just putting those date nights in, it was an absolute game changer to their relationship. On top of providing deliberate acts of affection. So kind of consciously tonight, if you are sitting at work or wherever you are right now, if you say, as soon as I see my partner tonight, I'm going to give them a kiss hello, just like a peck, right? Sometimes couples don't even do that, but you're starting to differentiate yourself between, the roommate versus the couple. So the kiss hello, the kiss goodbye, the coming in, you're sitting on the couch, maybe deliberately lean in a little bit and give them a bit more affection. These little acts sound like nothing, but if you progress and continue to do that and prioritize each other, then it leads to bigger acts over time.
And I know the podcast also focuses on the mental health aspects of being a parent.
Absolutely, because we can get so absorbed in all of the things that I know, particularly for myself, I'm a type A personality, a bit of a control freak. And I thought, all right, great. So I've got my businesses and I'm doing things. I'm going to have children. They're going to slot in. And then I'm just going to keep doing all the things I was doing. But I'll be just picking up my kids every now and then and dropping them off to swimming classes. That's easy. I can make that work. I'm a pretty productive person. How hard can that be? And what I realized is that I, from a mental health perspective, had to recalibrate my expectations because I was trying to do it all, I say in talking marks, but I was burning myself out, left, right, and center because I just didn't have the bandwidth. We have the same amount of time in the day, and yet now we have children to look after. So I think really adjusting our expectations, being mindful of our state, in our mental health state. If we are feeling flooded, if we are feeling overwhelmed, what are the things we need to adjust? Perhaps drop a couple of things off that to-do list to give ourselves a little bit more space.
Do you have any questions for Leonie?
I do. I have a couple of things that I would love to hear you talk about and kind of have a back and forth on. One of the first things is what's sort of your opinions and what do you know about like nannies and things like that for like the rich folks that have like au pairs and live in nannies. You know, I used to date a girl who was an au pair, and it's literally I didn't had no idea what it was at the time. And she told me it's like basically like it's a live-in nanny. You cook, you clean, you take care of their kids. And I'm like, well, that must be nice to be able to afford that first off. But I noticed after meeting several of these families, a lot of times they were very odd, and they always would have like a lot of kids too. You know what I mean? Like, what is that like a luxury? How do you think that affects the outcomes? Like,
Look, I definitely think it is a luxury, particularly in Australia, for example, if you're housing someone, you need to have a big enough home to house that person. So all of a sudden you're talking about people, I guess, who are a little bit more privileged, who can perhaps afford that. I do know, and it's funny, an article came out the other day, Kim Kardashian said something about being completely overwhelmed by parenthood, right? And there was a lot of commentary about that. Some people said, well, with all of that help that you're getting, how in the world can you be overwhelmed? And the other school of thought was, but hold on, she's still a mother. Her children, regardless of the fact that they have other people to go to, you know what it's like. They want mum a lot of the time. Mum, you know, that emotional connection, all that. You can't just palm that off.
Plus, Kim K is a business mogul. I mean, say what you want to say about her, but
Absolutely.
the woman is extremely intelligent in how she has, you know, marketed her life. So, I mean, I personally admire her, and you are going to need help if you're going to balance that much in life. And I mean, maybe I'm just caught up on, you know, keeping up with the Kardashians, but it seems like she tries to be a hands-on present mom and run this empire.
Exactly right. So to the point around, you know, does it help? How much, you know, stress does it relieve? If you do have that support, I think fundamentally the stress or not the stress, but that feeling of responsibility will always be there. Perhaps, you know, dialed down a little with extra help. I certainly don't have things. Well, if we have a nanny, it's literally just for an evening, so I could go for a dinner date, for example. I don't have help at home, so my list is probably going to be a bit longer than those that do. But I think fundamentally, people probably maybe underestimate, even those that do have help, how much it can still change your life in a huge way.
Of course. What do you think about this growing trend, sort of it coming back of being a lot of these women, young women, just aspiring to just be housewives or trad wives or things like that, where it used to be like you need to do everything, like you guys talk about business and be a parenthood. Now it seems like it's like they're idealizing this is like the main thing that we want to do. Like, do you think this is a healthy movement? Have you seen this? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, really interesting. And I actually think being a house wife or dad, you know, stay-at-home dad, is probably the hardest job in the world, personally. I just think there's, you know, the grind of just doing all the things. And I don't know, for me, my work is an escape, you know, and it's an opportunity to speak to adults and to, you know, get dressed up and off I go to work. So for me, I actually, you know, it helps my mental health. So those people who, I think people look at the stay-at-home parent often and think, oh, that's easy, you know. Wouldn't that be nice to just have your schedule and do whatever you need to do within your own time? So I'm curious because I hadn't really heard of that trend, but it probably, to those people who aren't parents yet, it probably sounds quite appealing. All right, well, I'll stay at home and look after the children. I'd be interested to see how that plays out over time, and if perhaps those people that thought that would be the role for them sort of start going, oh, I might actually want to have other passions and work outside of the household too. I don't know.
Yeah, I always think the same thing, but it's like a huge movement.
Is that
now,
right?
Yeah, I do.
They
I even see
idealize
that
the
with
50s,
my
60s. Yes.
Yeah, I see my older daughters that are of childbearing age now. They're 24, 26. Not that that's in the cards for them at this particular point, but both of them, and I think probably a lot of it was trying to watch me navigate a really high profile, demanding, incredibly demanding job. If I had it to do over again, I probably would have gone a different career path, because you can't, I'm in my 50s. I'm just now starting to make friends because all I could do is work and kids. I mean, it was like all consuming for so many years. And then the weekends I would try to go out and have something that look like a normal life, but I was so tired from waking up and being a shift, you know, getting into a newsroom at 3 a.m. every morning sharp. They need a pulse. So, I can see why my daughters want to stay home and raise the kids. I could see why that would be very appealing to them but like you say, it's appealing until you do it full time, because being a full-time parent has to be a lot.
And also there's, I speak to a lot of parents, even friends of mine who are stay-at-home mums, for example, and they say sometimes it's the loneliness, because you're not interacting and you have to purposely try and find people who are available during the day to perhaps have a coffee with or sort of interact it with, versus us coming to our workplaces and we're constantly having those conversations. The other thing is, I wonder if the grass is always greener, because with the stay-at-home mums, in my case, that I speak to, they always sort of admire, they're like, what I'm doing. Like, oh, wow, that's amazing. Like, you've got a podcast and you do this for your work. Wow. And so I wonder, and, they're happy doing their thing, but there's that little bit of admiration. Meanwhile, sometimes I sit there thinking, I wouldn't mind just having a few days at home to be with the children.
Right.
So I wonder if there's that grass is always greener.
I think it is. I think that's always, you want what you don't have or what you don't know. And then as soon as you get it, you're like, wait a minute.
It's outrageous. I'll just get my Starbucks and go do Pilates. It's like, okay, but that would be boring eventually, don't you think?
Yeah.
So I do have one last sort of question I want to ask you about. Do you hear from a lot of same-sex couples? Do they have the same struggles? How does that go?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I do. I've had a few on the show, and I would say that piece around the inequality, and that sometimes some, typically birth mum feels a little bit overwhelmed and it's a little bit much, and I feel like I'm doing everything. Meanwhile, let's call it dad is like, I'm doing the best I can here. I find that with same-sex couples, that dynamic doesn't exist to that extent. It's almost like, for example, two gay dads, let's call it, they don't have that recovery from the birth and that whole, so they're both able to, use a bottle and feed their child. So they're both equally able to do the duties. So they almost segregate duties in probably an admirable fashion. And so, yes, I believe, in all couples, we always see different dynamics, but I would say less so when it comes to inequality for same-sex couples.
Interesting. Well, tell our listeners and viewers how they can find your podcast.
Absolutely. So we're on all of the major platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and we live on Instagram as well. So if you want to follow us there, we are at Parenthood Pod.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Leonie, for joining us. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you, and I know you are going to be traveling afar back to your homeland soon, but we appreciate your stop here in Tampa, Florida.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Until next time, everybody.